Welcome to the Story Lab. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. The clock on my dashboard read 2:17 p.m. as I pulled into our driveway. I wasn't supposed to be home for another 3 hours, but a canceled meeting had freed up my afternoon. As I killed the engine, a smile tugged at my lips. Maybe I could surprise Alexandra with an impromptu date night. I stepped out of the car, briefcase in hand, and made my way to the front door. The moment I turned my key in the lock, I heard hurried footsteps from inside. Before I could push the door open, it swung inward, and my 7-year-old daughter Angelina barreled into me, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy!" she cried, wrapping her arms around my legs. "Someone's in Mama's room." I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Angelina hiccuped, burying her face in my suit pants. "I heard noises, and Mama told me to go play outside, but I was scared." My jaw clenched as I heard more footsteps approaching. Alexandra appeared in the hallway, her hair disheveled and her cheeks flushed. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Brian, you're home early," she said, her voice an octave too high. She glanced down at Angelina, her expression hardening. "Why do you lie to Papa, huh?" I gently pried Angelina's arms from my legs and knelt down to her level. "Angel, go to your room for a bit, okay? Daddy needs to talk to Mama." Angelina nodded, her bottom lip trembling. As she scampered off, I stood and faced Alexandra. "What's going on?" Alexandra's laugh was brittle. "Nothing. Angelina just has an overactive imagination. You know how kids are." I brushed past her, heading for our bedroom. Alexandra grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Brian, wait." I shook her off and threw open the bedroom door. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. Will Cruz, Alexandra's boss, stood by our bed, frantically trying to button his shirt. His belt lay discarded on the floor, and his hair was a mess. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Will cleared his throat. "Brian, this isn't what it looks like." I let out a harsh laugh. "Really? Because it looks like you're screwing my wife in my own bedroom." Will held up his hands, as if trying to calm a wild animal. "Look, we can work this out. How about $5,000? To forget this ever happened?" The rage that had been building inside me exploded. In 2 quick strides, I crossed the room and slammed Will against the wall. "You think you can buy me off?" "Brian, stop." Alexandra shrieked behind me. I ignored her, keeping my eyes locked on Will's terrified face. "You come into my home, sleep with my wife, and then try to pay me off like some cheap whore?" Will's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "I'm sorry, man. It was a mistake. It won't happen again." I released him and took a step back. "You're right. It won't." Turning, I grabbed my phone from my pocket and started recording. Will's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Making sure everyone knows what kind of man Will Cruz really is," I said, my voice cold. "Now, why don't you tell the camera exactly what you did?" Will's gaze darted between me and Alexandra, who stood frozen in the doorway. "Brian, come on. Let's talk about this like adults." I unbuckled my belt and pulled it free with a sharp snap. Will flinched. "Talk? Oh, we're way past talking." What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. The crack of leather against skin. Will's pleas for mercy. Alexandra's shouts for me to stop. But I didn't stop. Not until Will was a sobbing mess on the floor, his back crisscrossed with angry red welts. I ended the recording and pocketed my phone. "Get out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Will scrambled to his feet, grabbing his shoes and belt. He cast one last frightened look at me before bolting from the room. I turned to Alexandra, who had gone pale. "Brian, listen," she started. I held up a hand, silencing her. "Save it. Pack your things and get out. You have 10 minutes. Alexandra's eyes filled with tears. "Please, Brian. Understand. I love you." I laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. "Love? You don't even know the meaning of the word." I gestured towards the door. 9 minutes. As Alexandra rushed to gather her belongings, I walked to Angelina's room. My daughter sat on her bed, hugging her favorite stuffed animal. When she saw me, her lower lip started to quiver again. I sat down next to her, pulling her into a hug. It's okay, Angel. Everything's going to be okay. Where's Mama going? Angelina asked, her voice muffled against my chest. I stroked her hair, my heart breaking for her. Mama, Mama has to go away for a while. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. We sat like that until I heard the front door slam. I pulled back, wiping away Angelina's tears with my thumb. How about we order some pizza for dinner? Your choice of toppings. Angelina nodded, a small smile appearing on her face. As she rattled off her preferred pizza toppings, I felt a determination settle over me. Alexandra and Will thought they could destroy my family and get away with it. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Later that night, after Angelina had gone to bed, I sat at my computer, the video of Will's confession playing on loop. With a few clicks, I uploaded it to every social media platform I could think of, tagging both Will and Alexandra. Then I leaned back in my chair, a smile on my face as I watched the view count start to climb. By morning, the video had gone viral. My phone was flooded with notifications, messages of support mixed with shocked comments from mutual friends. I ignored them all, focusing instead on making Angelina's favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes. As we sat at the kitchen table, Angelina picking at her food, I received a call from Will and Alexandra's company. The HR representative on the other end sounded flustered. Mr. Norton, we've seen the video, she said. I want to assure you that we take these matters very seriously. Mr. Cruz has been suspended pending an investigation, and we'd like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss the situation further. I agreed to the meeting, hanging up just as Angelina asked, Daddy, when is Mama coming home? The question felt like a punch to the gut. I reached across the table, taking her small hand in mine. Angel, remember how I said Mama had to go away for a while? Well, it might be for a long time. But I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. Angelina's lower lip trembled, but she nodded bravely. As I helped her get ready for school, I made a silent vow. Alexandra and Will had made their choices. Now they would face the consequences. A week passed in a blur of lawyers' meetings, hushed phone calls, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Angelina. The video had done its job, destroying not only Alexandra and Will's reputations, but also sending shockwaves through their company. I'd heard through the grapevine that several other employees had come forward with similar stories about Will. I was in the kitchen, half-heartedly attempting to make spaghetti for dinner, when the doorbell rang. Wiping my hands on a dish towel, I made my way to the front door. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with a woman I'd never seen before, flanked by two police officers. The woman's lips were pursed in a thin line, her eyes cold as she looked me up and down. Brian Norton? I nodded, my guard immediately up. That's me. And you are? Alyssa Salazar, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Will Cruz's wife and the owner of the company you've so thoroughly dragged through the mud. I raised an eyebrow. Funny, I thought it was your husband who did the dragging. Through my bedroom, to be specific. Alyssa's eyes narrowed. Listen here. You pathetic excuse for a man. My husband has money, so he can do whatever he wants. You, on the other hand, are nothing but a speck of dust beneath our shoes. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Is there a point to this visit, Mrs. Salazar? Or did you just come to share your charming personality? One of the police officers cleared his throat. Mr. Norton, we're here about the video you posted online. Mrs. Salazar has filed a complaint for defamation and invasion of privacy. I laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. Invasion of privacy? That's rich, considering it was your husband who invaded my home and my marriage. Alyssa took a step forward, her finger jabbing into my chest. I want that video taken down. Now, or I'll make sure you regret the day you were born. I grabbed her wrist, removing her hand from my personal space. I'd be careful with threats if I were you, Mrs. Salazar. They tend to backfire. The other police officer stepped between us. Sir, we're going to need you to come down to the station to answer some questions. I shook my head, not without my lawyer present. If you'll excuse me, I have a call to make. Closing the door in their faces, I immediately dialed Harold Blake, my longtime friend and attorney. Harold picked up on the second ring. Brian, what's going on? I quickly filled him in on the situation. Harold's sigh crackled through the phone. Sit tight. I'll be there in 15 minutes. True to his word, Harold arrived shortly after, his briefcase in hand and a determined look on his face. I let him in, grateful for his steady presence. "Where's Angelina?" he asked as we made our way to the living room. "At a friend's house for a playdate," I replied. "I didn't want her to see any of this." Harold nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. Now, let's deal with our unwelcome visitors." We stepped outside to find Alyssa and the officers still waiting. Harold immediately took charge, his voice calm but firm. "Gentlemen, Mrs. Salazar, I'm Harold Blake, Mr. Norton's attorney. I understand there's been some confusion about a video my client posted." Alyssa's eyes flashed. "There's no confusion. He posted a private video without consent, and I want him arrested." Harold held up a hand. "I'm afraid it's not that simple. The video in question was recorded in Mr. Norton's own home, where he had a reasonable expectation of privacy. Your husband, on the other hand, was trespassing and engaging in illicit activities." The officers exchanged glances. One of them turned to Alyssa. "Ma'am, given these circumstances, we can't arrest Mr. Norton without further investigation." Alyssa's face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous. Do you have any idea who I am? Who my husband is?" I stepped forward, my voice low and controlled. "Oh, we know exactly who you and your husband are. And soon, everyone else will too." Harold placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent warning to let him handle this. He turned back to the officers. "Gentlemen, unless you have a warrant, I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave. Any further questions can be directed to my office." The officers nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. As they turned to leave, Alyssa fixed me with a venomous glare. "This isn't over, Norton. Not by a long shot." I met her gaze unflinchingly. "You're right. It's just beginning." As Alyssa stormed off and the police car pulled away, Harold turned to me with a sigh. "You know she's going to make good on that threat, right?" I nodded, a smile on my face. "I'm counting on it. In fact, I want you to dig deep into both Alyssa and Will's backgrounds. Something tells me this isn't the first time they've pulled this kind of stunt." Harold raised an eyebrow. "You're not planning on letting this go, are you?" "Not a chance in hell," I replied. "They came into my home, destroyed my family, and now they're trying to intimidate me? They have no idea who they're dealing with." Harold rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "We might want to consider hiring a private investigator. I know a guy, Hal Harmon. He's discreet and thorough." I nodded. "Do it. And Harold, I want you to contact the police about possible victims at their company. The videos brought a few forward already, but I bet there are more." Harold's expression turned serious. "Brian, you're talking about taking on some powerful people." I met his gaze. "They started this war, Harold. I'm just making sure I finish it." As Harold left to make the necessary arrangements, I found myself standing in the empty living room, surrounded by family photos that now felt like relics from another life. My eyes landed on a picture of Alexandra, Angelina, and me at the beach last summer. We looked so happy, so perfect. I picked up the frame, my fingers tracing the outline of Alexandra's face. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of her betrayal, the pain so sharp it took my breath away. Then, with deliberate slowness, I removed the photo from the frame and tore it in half, separating Alexandra from Angelina and me. As I dropped the torn pieces into the trash, I made a silent vow. Alexandra and Will thought they could destroy my family and walk away unscathed. They were about to learn how wrong they were. And Alyssa? She'd made a grave mistake in threatening me. By the time I was done, they'd all wish they'd never crossed paths with Brian Norton. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal meetings. I'd initiated divorce proceedings against Alexandra, wielding our prenuptial agreement like a sword to protect my assets. She tried to contest it, of course, but Harold had assured me it was ironclad. Today was the day of our first court appearance for the custody hearing. I adjusted my tie in the hallway mirror, steeling myself for what was to come. Angelina appeared behind me, her small face pinched with worry. "Daddy, do I have to go to court?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I turned and knelt down to her level, placing my hands on her shoulders. "No, sweetheart. You're going to stay with Aunt Sarah today. Remember? You two are going to bake cookies and watch movies. Relief washed over her face, quickly followed by guilt. Is Mama going to be there? My jaw clenched involuntarily, but I forced a smile. She might be. But don't worry about that, okay? This is grown-up stuff. Your job is to have fun with Aunt Sarah. Angelina nodded, then threw her arms around my neck. I hugged her tightly, inhaling the scent of her strawberry shampoo. I love you, Angel, I whispered. Love you too, Daddy, she mumbled into my shoulder. After dropping Angelina off at my sister's house, I made my way to the courthouse. Harold was waiting for me on the steps, his briefcase in hand and a determined look on his face. Ready for this? He asked as I approached. I nodded. Let's get it over with. We made our way inside, the cool air conditioning a stark contrast to the summer heat outside. As we approached the designated courtroom, I saw her. Alexandra was standing with her lawyer, her hair perfectly coiffed and her makeup flawless. But I could see the cracks in her facade, the slight tremor in her hands, the tightness around her eyes. She looked up as we approached, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the mother of my child. Then her gaze hardened, and she turned away. Brian, Harold murmured, placing a hand on my arm. Remember, stay calm. Let me do the talking. I took a deep breath, centering myself. You're right. Let's do this. We entered the courtroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind us. Alexandra and her lawyer were already seated at one table. Harold and I took our places at the other. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, called the court to order. We're here today to discuss the divorce proceedings of Brian and Alexandra Norton, as well as custody arrangements for their minor child, Angelina Norton. Let's begin. Alexandra's lawyer stood first. Your Honor, my client is seeking joint custody of Angelina. She's been a devoted mother for 7 years and believes it's in the child's best interest to maintain a relationship with both parents. I clenched my fists under the table, but Harold placed a calming hand on my arm before standing. Your Honor, while we appreciate Mrs. Norton's sentiment, we have serious concerns about her ability to provide a stable environment for Angelina. As evidenced by the incident that led to this divorce, Mrs. Norton has shown a severe lack of judgment and moral character. Alexandra's lawyer bristled. Objection, Your Honor. My client's personal life has no bearing on her ability to parent. The judge raised an eyebrow. I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Blake. Harold nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. We have documentation showing that Mrs. Norton's infidelity took place in the family home, with the child present. This demonstrates a blatant disregard for Angelina's well-being and emotional health. I watched Alexandra's face pale as Harold continued to lay out our case. When it was her turn to speak, she stood, her voice trembling slightly. Your Honor, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I love my daughter more than anything in this world. Please don't take her away from me. The judge's expression remained impassive. Mrs. Norton, love alone is not enough to ensure a child's well-being. Mr. Norton, do you have anything to add? I stood, my voice steady. Yes, Your Honor. I've been Angelina's primary caregiver since this incident occurred. I've maintained her routine, kept her in school, and provided a stable home environment. I'm asking for full custody to continue providing that stability. The judge nodded, then turned to Alexandra. Mrs. Norton, are you currently employed? Alexandra shifted uncomfortably. No, Your Honor. I lost my job due to the circumstances of my divorce. And where are you living now? With my sister, temporarily, Alexandra admitted. The judge made a note, then looked between us. Based on the evidence presented and the current circumstances, I'm granting temporary full custody to Mr. Norton, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Norton. We'll reassess in 6 months. Court adjourned. The gavel's bang echoed through the room. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Harold clapped me on the shoulder. We did it, Brian. As we gathered our things, I caught Alexandra's eye. She looked shell-shocked, her makeup smeared from silent tears. For a moment, I felt a twinge of something. Not regret, exactly, but a sort of hollow ache for what we'd lost. Then I remembered Angelina's tears, the betrayal, the lies. Let's go, Harold. I need to pick up my daughter. As we left the courthouse, I saw Will waiting by a car. He started towards Alexandra, but froze when he saw me. I fixed him with a cold stare until he turned away, shoulders slumped. Harold watched the exchange with interest. You know, Brian, there's still the matter of your business. Our PI, Hal, has some concerning reports about attempts at sabotage. I nodded. Then let's meet with Hal. This isn't over yet. As we walked to our cars, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The custody battle was won, but the war was far from over. Will, Alexandra, and Alyssa had no idea what was coming for them, and I was just getting started. The ceiling fan in Hal Harmon's office whirred lazily, doing little to dispel the summer heat. I loosened my tie, leaning forward in the worn leather chair as Hal spread a collection of files across his cluttered desk. So, what have you got for me? I asked, eager to hear the fruits of his investigation. Hal, a grizzled ex-cop with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, took a long sip of his coffee before answering. Well, Brian, it's not pretty. Your suspicions were right on the money. Someone's been taking shots at your business. I felt my jaw clench. Will and Alyssa? Hal nodded, pushing a file towards me. Looks that way. We've traced several anonymous tips to regulatory agencies back to IP addresses associated with their company. They've been trying to trigger audits, inspections, you name it. I flipped through the file, my anger rising with each page. Bastards. They're not content with wrecking my personal life. They want to destroy everything I've built. That's not all, Hal continued. I've been digging into Will's history at the company. Turns out, your ex-wife wasn't his first indiscretion. My head snapped up. What do you mean? Hal slid another file across the desk. I've compiled a list of potential victims. At least 5 women over the past 3 years, all former employees who left under mysterious circumstances. I flipped through the pages, my disgust growing with each name and photo. Have you contacted any of them? Hal shook his head. Not yet. Wanted to run it by you first. Some of these women signed NDAs when they left. They might be hesitant to talk. I leaned back, my mind racing. We need to reach out to them. Carefully. If we can get them to come forward, it could blow this whole thing wide open, Hal finished, nodding. But there's more, Brian. And this is big. He pushed a final file towards me, his expression grave. I opened it, scanning the contents. My eyes widened as I realized what I was looking at. Is this for real? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Hal nodded solemnly. 100% verified. Their new product line? It's got some serious health and safety issues. They know about it, but they're pushing forward anyway. I stood up, pacing the small office. This is huge, Hal. We could take down the whole company with this. It's a double-edged sword, Brian, Hal warned. Use this information, and you're painting a target on your back. Will and Alyssa? They'll come at you with everything they've got. I turned to face him. Let them come. I'm done playing defense. It's time to take the fight to them. Hal leaned back in his chair, studying me. What's your play? I sat back down, leaning forward intently. First, we need to contact those women. I want to hear their stories directly. Can you set up meetings? Hal nodded. I can arrange it. Discreetly, of course. Good. And I want everything you can dig up on this faulty product line. Emails, memos, test results, anything that proves they knew about the dangers and chose to ignore them. I'm on it, Hal said, already reaching for his phone. What about Will and Alyssa? Want me to keep tabs on them? I nodded. Absolutely. I want to know every move they make. If they so much as jaywalk, I want to hear about it. As I stood to leave, Hal called out, Brian, one more thing. There are 2 women on that list who seemed more willing to talk. Polly Walter and Missy Pierce. Might want to start with them. I paused at the door, turning back. Set it up. And Hal? Thank you. For everything. He waved me off with a gruff nod, already buried in his files. As I left his office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Will and Alyssa thought they could bully me into submission, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I was going to bring their whole corrupt empire crashing down around their ears. The next day, I found myself sitting in a quiet cafe, waiting for Polly Walter. Hal had arranged the meeting, assuring me that Polly was eager to talk. As I sipped my coffee, I saw a woman enter, her eyes darting nervously around the room. I stood, catching her attention. Polly? I'm Brian Norton. She approached cautiously, sliding into the seat across from me. Mr. Norton. I wasn't sure about coming, but when your investigator mentioned Will Cruz, I leaned forward, keeping my voice low and reassuring. Polly, I appreciate you meeting with me. I know this must be difficult. Can you tell me what happened between you and Will? Polly's hands shook as she clasped them on the table. It started small. Compliments, lingering looks. Then it was closed-door meetings, his hand on my knee. When I refused his advances, he threatened my job. Said he'd make sure I never worked in the industry again. My jaw clenched, but I kept my voice calm. Did you report him? Polly laughed bitterly. To who? HR? They're in Alyssa's pocket. I tried to file a complaint once. Next thing I knew, I was being accused of poor performance, put on probation. I ended up quitting before they could fire me. I nodded. My suspicions confirmed. Polly, I'm building a case against Will and Alyssa. Would you be willing to go on record with your story? Fear flashed in her eyes. I don't know. The NDA I signed is null and void if it's concealing illegal activities, I finished. Which this clearly is. Polly, you're not alone. There are others, and together, we can stop them from hurting anyone else. Polly was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'll do it. What do you need from me? We spent the next hour going over her story in detail. As Polly left, looking both relieved and terrified, I felt a mix of anger and determination. Will Cruz was going to pay for every life he'd ruined. The meeting with Missy Pierce the next day went similarly. Her story was even more harrowing. Will had actually assaulted her at a company retreat. She'd been too scared to press charges, instead accepting a hefty severance package in exchange for her silence. I've carried this guilt for years, Missy said, wiping away tears. Knowing that he was still out there, probably doing the same thing to other women. When your investigator called, I knew I had to speak up. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand gently. You're incredibly brave, Missy. Will you help us bring him down? Missy straightened, a fire in her eyes. Just tell me what you need me to do. As I left the meeting with Missy, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Hal. Got something big. Meet me as soon as possible. I rushed to Hal's office, finding him hunched over his computer, a look of triumph on his face. Brian, you're not going to believe this. I managed to hack into Will's email. Look at this. He turned the screen towards me. I leaned in, reading the email exchange between Will and a product safety engineer. My eyes widened as I realized what I was seeing. They knew. I breathed. They knew about the defects and decided to push forward anyway. Hal nodded. It gets worse. Look at the projection reports. They've calculated the potential lawsuit costs against the projected profits. They're literally gambling with people's lives. I straightened, my mind racing. This is it, Hal. This is how we take them down. We need to get this information to the right people. I've got contacts at the FDA, Hal offered. We could anonymously tip them off. I shook my head. No, we're going to do this in a way they can't ignore. The company's annual gala is coming up next month, right? Hal nodded slowly, realization dawning on his face. You're not thinking. Oh, I am, I said, a smile spreading across my face. We're going to expose everything. Will's abuse, the product defects, all of it right in front of their investors, the press, everyone. Hal let out a low whistle. That's one hell of a risk, Brian. You sure about this? I met his gaze steadily. They came after my family, my business, my life. It's time to return the favor. Call Polly and Missy. We've got a lot of planning to do. As I left Hal's office, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Alexandra. Can we talk? Please. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a single word reply. No. Will and Alyssa had no idea what was coming for them. And Alexandra? She'd made her choice. Now she'd have to live with the consequences. The night of the gala arrived, crisp and clear. I adjusted my bow tie in the rearview mirror of my car, parked a block away from the glittering hotel where the event was being held. Polly and Missy sat in the back seat, both looking nervous but determined. "You both remember the plan?" I asked, turning to face them. Polly nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "We wait for your signal, then make our way to the stage. And we tell our stories," Missy added, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "No matter what." I gave them both a reassuring smile. "You're doing the right thing. Ready?" They nodded in unison. We exited the car and made our way towards the hotel, the sounds of music and laughter growing louder as we approached. At the entrance, a security guard checked our names against the guest list. "Mr. Norton," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I wasn't aware you were attending tonight." I flashed him a charming smile. "Last-minute decision. I hope that's not a problem." The guard hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "No, sir. Enjoy your evening." As we entered the ballroom, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. They thought they'd pushed me out of their world, but here I was, walking right back in. The room was a sea of designer gowns and tuxedos, champagne flutes clinking as the city's elite mingled. I scanned the crowd, quickly spotting Will and Alyssa near the stage. They were deep in conversation with a group of investors, all smiles and charm. "There they are," I murmured to Polly and Missy. "Remember, act natural. We don't want to tip them off." We split up, each of us circulating through the crowd. I made my way to the bar, ordering a scotch I had no intention of drinking. From my vantage point, I could see Will making his way to the stage. It was almost time. Will tapped the microphone, his voice booming through the room. "Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Alyssa and myself, I want to thank you all for coming tonight." As Will droned on about the company's successes and future plans, I slipped away from the bar. With everyone's attention focused on the stage, it was easy to make my way to the AV booth at the back of the room. The technician looked up in surprise as I entered. "Sir, you can't be in here." I cut him off, flashing a bundle of cash. "I need 5 minutes with the equipment. Walk away, and this is yours." His eyes widened at the amount, and he quickly nodded, slipping out of the booth. I immediately got to work, plugging in the flash drive Hal had prepared. As Will's voice droned on about exciting new product lines, I couldn't help but smile. He had no idea what was coming. With everything set up, I made my way back into the crowd, catching Polly and Missy's eyes. They both gave me subtle nods. It was time. As Will wrapped up his speech to polite applause, I strode purposefully towards the stage. Alyssa, standing off to the side, saw me coming. Her eyes widened in alarm. "Security," she hissed, but it was too late. I bounded up the steps, grabbing the microphone from a stunned Will. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but there's something you all need to see." With a click of the remote in my pocket, the large screen behind the stage flickered to life. The room fell silent as Will's emails filled the screen, detailing the product defects and the cold calculations of profits versus potential lawsuits. The room erupted into chaos as the implications of the emails sank in. Investors gasped, reporters scrambled for their phones, and Will's face drained of all color. I raised my voice over the growing din. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing is evidence of willful negligence and fraud." Will Cruz and Alyssa Salazar knew about potentially life-threatening defects in their products, yet chose to proceed for the sake of profit. Will lunged for the microphone, but I held it out of his reach. "Brian, you have no right." "I have every right," I cut him off. "Just like your employees had the right to a safe work environment, free from sexual harassment and abuse." Alyssa stormed onto the stage, her face contorted with rage. "Security, remove this man immediately." But the security guards hesitated, their eyes glued to the damning evidence still scrolling across the screen. I turned to face the crowd again. This company's corruption goes beyond faulty products. Will Cruz has a history of sexual harassment and abuse, which Alyssa Salazar has actively helped cover up. On cue, Polly and Missy made their way to the stage. Will's eyes widened in recognition and fear. "These brave women are just 2 of Will's victims," I continued. "Polly, would you like to share your story?" Polly stepped forward, her voice shaky but growing stronger as she spoke. "Will Cruz sexually harassed me for months. When I refused his advances, he threatened my job and my career. I was forced to quit to escape his abuse. The crowd murmured in shock and disgust. Missy then took the microphone, her eyes blazing with long suppressed anger. "Will Cruz assaulted me at a company retreat," she said. When I tried to report it, Alyssa Salazar personally intervened. They bought my silence with a severance package and threats. By now, several investors were heading for the exits, while reporters were frantically taking notes and making calls. "Will finally managed to grab the microphone from me. This is all lies and slander. We'll sue you for every penny you have, Norton." I laughed, the sound echoing through the suddenly quiet room. "Go ahead, Will. Discovery will be fascinating. I'm sure the authorities will be very interested in what they find." As if on cue, the ballroom doors burst open, and a team of FBI agents strode in, led by a stern-faced woman in a suit. "Will Cruz, Alyssa Salazar," she called out, flashing her badge. "I'm Agent Reeves with the FBI. We have some questions for you regarding allegations of fraud, sexual harassment, and endangering public safety." The look of sheer panic on Will and Alyssa's faces was almost comical. As the agents approached the stage, Will turned to me, his voice low and desperate. "Brian, please. We can work something out. Name your price." I leaned in close, my voice barely above a whisper. "My price? You already paid it. With my marriage, my family, my trust. And now, I'm collecting the interest." As the FBI led Will and Alyssa away in handcuffs, I turned back to the stunned crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for disrupting your evening, but the truth needed to be heard." With that, I stepped off the stage, making my way through the buzzing crowd. Reporters swarmed around me, shouting questions, but I brushed past them. My work here was done. Outside the hotel, I found Polly and Missy waiting by my car. Their faces showed a mix of relief and apprehension. "What happens now?" Polly asked, hugging herself against the cool night air. I opened the car doors for them. "Now, we make sure justice is served. Your testimony will be crucial in the coming days. Are you both ready for that?" They exchanged a look, then nodded firmly. "We're ready," Missy said. "Thank you, Brian, for giving us the chance to speak out." As we drove away from the chaos we'd left behind, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Will and Alyssa's empire was crumbling, and Alexandra, well, she'd made her bed. Now she'd have to lie in it. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The morning after the gala, I woke to my phone buzzing incessantly. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of notifications. The story had broken wide open, dominating every news channel and social media platform. I made my way downstairs, finding Angelina already up and watching TV. Her eyes were wide as she stared at the breaking news coverage. "Daddy," she said, her voice small, "why is everyone talking about you and Mama's work?" I sat down next to her, pulling her close. "Remember how I told you sometimes grown-ups do bad things? Well, some people at Mama's work did some very bad things, and I helped make sure they couldn't hurt anyone else." Angelina nodded slowly. "Is that why Mama doesn't live with us anymore?" My heart clenched, but I kept my voice steady. "Part of it, yes. But don't worry about that now, okay? How about some breakfast?" As I was making pancakes, my phone rang. It was Harold. "Brian," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "Have you seen the news?" I flipped a pancake, wedging the phone between my ear and shoulder. "Kind of hard to miss. What's the situation?" "It's chaos," Harold replied. "The FBI has officially launched a full investigation into the company. They've already seized documents and computers from the offices." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Good. What about Will and Alyssa?" "Still in custody. They're being arraigned this afternoon." "Brian, this is big. Really big. The SEC is getting involved too, looking into potential securities fraud." I slid the pancakes onto a plate for Angelina. "What do we need to do next?" "We've got a meeting with the FBI this afternoon," Harold said. "They want to go over everything we have." "And Brian?" Alexandra's lawyer reached out. "She wants to talk." I felt my jaw clench. "Tell her it's too late for talking." After breakfast and arranging for my sister to watch Angelina, I made my way to the FBI field office. The place was a hive of activity, agents rushing back and forth with boxes of documents and hard drives. Agent Reeves met me in the lobby, her face grim but determined. "Mr. Norton, thank you for coming in. We have a lot to discuss." She led me to a conference room where Harold was already waiting, along with several other agents and what looked like a representative from the SEC. "Mr. Norton," the SEC rep began, "we're going to need you to walk us through everything you found, from the beginning." For the next several hours, I laid out the whole sordid tale. The affairs, the cover-ups, the product defects, the financial fraud. By the time I finished, the room was silent, the agents furiously scribbling notes. Agent Reeves leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Mr. Norton, I want to be clear. Your actions last night, while effective, could have jeopardized our investigation. In the future, I'd appreciate if you came to us first." I met her gaze steadily. "With all due respect, Agent Reeves, I did try to alert the authorities. But nothing happened. Sometimes, you have to force people to pay attention." She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Fair enough. Now, let's talk about next steps. We're going to need you and the other witnesses to be available for further questioning and potentially testimony." "Whatever you need," I replied. "I want to see justice served." As we wrapped up the meeting, Harold pulled me aside. "Brian, there's something else you should know. Alexandra's cooperating with the investigation. She's offering to testify against Will." I felt a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. "Too little, too late," I muttered. Harold nodded sympathetically. "I know, but it could be helpful for the case." "And Brian? She's asking to see Angelina." I shook my head firmly. "No, not yet. Maybe not ever. She made her choice, Harold. Now she has to live with it." As we reached my home, outside I was immediately swarmed by reporters. Microphones were shoved in my face, questions flying from all directions. "Mr. Norton, how long have you known about the product defects? Is it true that your ex-wife was involved in the cover-up? Do you have any comment on the allegations of sexual harassment?" I held up my hands, silencing the crowd. "I'll make a brief statement, but I won't be taking questions at this time." The reporters fell silent, cameras rolling. "What happened at Cruise Industries was a systemic failure of ethics and leadership," I began. "Will Cruz and Alyssa Salazar put profits above people's safety and well-being? They created a culture of fear and abuse. But they didn't act alone. There were many who knew what was happening and chose to stay silent. To those people, I say this: it's not too late to do the right thing. Come forward. Tell the truth. Help ensure that justice is served." With that, I pushed my way through the crowd, ignoring the shouted follow-up questions. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but I felt like I was on the right path. Back home, I found Angelina curled up on the couch, looking worried. "Daddy," she said as I sat down next to her, "are you in trouble? The TV said you did something bad to Mama's work." I pulled her close, stroking her hair. "No, sweetheart. I'm not in trouble. I helped stop some bad people from hurting others. It's complicated, but I promise everything's going to be okay." As Angelina snuggled against me, I silently vowed to protect her from the storm that was coming. Will, Alyssa, Alexandra, they'd all made their choices. Now it was time for me to make mine. And my choice was clear: to be the father Angelina deserved, to rebuild our lives, and to make sure that justice was served. The coming weeks would be challenging, but I was ready. Let them come, I thought. I've faced worse and come out stronger. This time would be no different. 3 months after the gala that turned the business world upside down, I found myself sitting in a bustling cafe, a stack of papers in front of me. The last quarter had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media frenzy, and personal upheaval. But today marked a new chapter. "Mr. Norton," a voice called out. I looked up to see a young woman approaching, her hand extended. "I'm Jennifer Zhao, from the Small Business Association. We spoke on the phone?" I stood, shaking her hand. "Please call me Brian. Thanks for meeting me." As we sat down, Jennifer pulled out a tablet. "So, Brian, you mentioned you're looking to start a new venture? Something about ethical business practices consulting?" I nodded, sliding a business plan across the table. "That's right. After everything that happened with Cruise Industries, I realize there's a real need for this kind of service. Companies need help implementing ethical practices from the ground up. Jennifer skimmed through the document, her eyebrows rising. This is incredibly thorough. You've really thought this through. I've had some time on my hands, I said with a wry smile. Between the ongoing investigations and the custody arrangements, I needed something positive to focus on. We spent the next hour going over the details of my proposal. As Jennifer packed up her things, she gave me an approving nod. I've got to say, Brian, I'm impressed. You've taken a horrible situation and turned it into an opportunity to make real change. I'll submit my recommendation for the loan approval today. As she left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just about starting a new business. It was about creating something positive out of all the pain and betrayal. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Polly. Just finished another FBI interview. How are you holding up? I quickly typed back, hanging in there. How about you? Her response came moments later. Better every day. Thanks to you, Brian. You gave us our voices back. I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest. Amidst all the chaos, knowing that I'd helped Polly, Missy, and the other victims find justice made it all worthwhile. As I left the cafe, my phone rang again. It was Harold. Brian, he said, his voice tense. We've got a situation. Alexandra's lawyer reached out again. She's threatening to go to the press with some story about you if you don't agree to unsupervised visitation with Angelina. I felt a familiar anger rising. She's bluffing, Harold. She's got nothing on me. Maybe, Harold conceded, but the press is hungry for any angle on this story. Even if it's not true, it could cause problems. I pinched the bridge of my nose, thinking, set up a meeting. It's time I talked to Alexandra face to face. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Alexandra in Harold's office. She looked different, smaller somehow, without her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. Brian, she began, her voice soft. I know you hate me. I cut her off. I don't hate you, Alexandra. I'm nothing to you. You're just someone I used to know who made some very poor choices. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I made mistakes, I know that. But Angelina is still my daughter. I have a right to see her. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. You lost that right when you chose Will over your family. When you brought that man into our home, with our daughter there. I never meant for any of this to happen, Alexandra pleaded. I was weak, I was stupid, but I'm trying to make things right. I'm cooperating with the investigation, telling them everything I know about Will and Alyssa. I sat back, studying her. And that's supposed to make everything okay? You think that erases what you did? Alexandra's eyes filled with tears. No, of course not. But it's a start, isn't it? Please, Brian. I just want a chance to be in Angelina's life. I was silent for a long moment, weighing my options. Finally, I spoke. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to continue cooperating with the investigation. You're going to seek counseling to deal with whatever issues led you to make such disastrous choices. And maybe, if you can prove that you've changed, we can revisit the visitation arrangement in 6 months. Alexandra nodded eagerly. Yes, of course. Anything. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. And Alexandra? If you ever try to threaten or manipulate me again, especially when it comes to Angelina, you'll find out just how ruthless I can be. Are we clear? She swallowed hard, nodding. As I left the office, I felt a sense of closure. Alexandra was no longer the woman I had loved. But maybe, just maybe, she could become someone worthy of being in Angelina's life again. Only time would tell. That evening, as Angelina and I sat at the dinner table, she looked up at me with those big, questioning eyes. Daddy, she said hesitantly, is Mama ever coming home? I put down my fork, giving her my full attention. No, sweetheart. Mama and I aren't going to be together anymore. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. Angelina pushed her peas around her plate. But why? Didn't you love each other? I reached across the table, taking her small hand in mine. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that hurt the people they love. And sometimes those mistakes are too big to fix. But I want you to know that none of this is your fault. And no matter what, you will always be loved. Angelina nodded, her lower lip trembling slightly. "Can I still see Mama sometimes?" I hesitated, then nodded. "We're working on that. It might take some time. But if Mama shows she can be responsible and make good choices, then yes, you'll be able to see her." As I tucked Angelina into bed that night, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The past few months had been a nightmare, but we were emerging on the other side. My new business was taking shape, justice was being served, and most importantly, Angelina was safe and loved. The legal proceedings were far from over, and rebuilding our lives would take time. But as I kissed Angelina's forehead and turned out her light, I knew we would make it. We had each other, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The next morning, I woke early, feeling energized despite the challenges ahead. I had a busy day planned, starting with a meeting with some of Will's other victims who had come forward after the gala. As I prepared breakfast, Angelina shuffled into the kitchen, still in her pajamas. "Daddy, can I come to work with you today?" she asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I smiled, ruffling her hair. "Not today, sweetheart. I've got some important meetings. But how about we go to the park this weekend? Just you and me?" Her face lit up. "Can we feed the ducks?" "Absolutely," I promised, setting a plate of pancakes in front of her. After dropping Angelina off at school, I headed to the community center where I'd arranged to meet the other victims. As I walked in, I saw Polly and Missy already there, along with 3 other women I recognized from the company. "Brian," Polly greeted me with a warm smile. "Thank you for organizing this." I nodded, taking a seat in the circle of chairs. I thought it might help if we all talked, shared our experiences. "There's strength in numbers." One of the women, Sarah, spoke up hesitantly. I'm still not sure about testifying. What if they come after us?" I leaned forward, my voice firm but gentle. "That's exactly why we need to stand together. Will and Alyssa can't hurt you anymore. But by speaking out, you can protect others from going through what you did." Missy nodded in agreement. "It's scary, I know. But every time I talk about what happened, I feel a little stronger, like I'm taking back control." For the next 2 hours, we talked, sharing stories and offering support. By the end, even Sarah seemed more resolved. "Okay," she said, squaring her shoulders. "I'll do it. I'll testify." As the meeting wrapped up, I felt a sense of pride in these women's courage. "Remember, I told them, you're not alone in this. We're in it together." After the meeting, I headed to my new office space. It was small, just a single room with a desk and a few chairs, but it was a start. As I settled in, my phone rang. It was Agent Reeves. "Mr. Norton," she said, her voice brisk. "I thought you'd want to know. Will Cruz has agreed to a plea deal. He's going to testify against Alyssa Salazar in exchange for a reduced sentence." I felt a mix of emotions, relief, satisfaction, and a lingering anger. What about the victims? Will they still get their day in court? "They will," Agent Reeves assured me. "His plea doesn't negate their testimony. In fact, it corroborates their stories." After hanging up, I sat back in my chair, processing the news. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was justice. Will would pay for his crimes, and Alyssa wouldn't be able to hide behind her wealth and power anymore. As the day wore on, I threw myself into work, outlining plans for my new consulting business. I was determined to use my experience to help other companies avoid the pitfalls that had brought down cruise industries. Just as I was packing up to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "Check your email. You're going to want to see this." Curious, I opened my laptop and found an email from a major business magazine. They wanted to do a feature story on me, focusing on my role in exposing the corruption at cruise industries and my new venture in ethical business consulting. As I read the email, I felt a sense of validation. This wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about using my platform to affect real change in the business world. On my way to pick up Angelina from school, I called Harold. "What do you think about the magazine offer?" I asked. Harold chuckled. "I think it's a hell of an opportunity, Brian. A chance to tell your side of the story, promote your new business, and maybe inspire others to stand up against corporate corruption." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "You're right. Set it up." As I pulled up to Angelina's school, I saw her waiting on the steps, her face lighting up when she spotted my car. In that moment, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Despite everything we'd been through, we were okay. More than okay. How was your day, Angel? I asked as she climbed into the car. She launched into a detailed account of her day, her excitement palpable. As I listened, I realized that this, right here, was what truly mattered. Not the legal battles, not the new business, not even the justice we'd fought so hard for. It was this simple moment with my daughter. That evening, as Angelina and I sat on the couch, reading her favorite bedtime story, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. We'd been through hell, but we'd come out the other side stronger. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still court cases to navigate, a new business to build, and a life to rebuild. But I was ready for it all, because now I knew, without a doubt, that I could handle whatever life threw at me. As I tucked Angelina into bed, she looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes. "Daddy," she said sleepily, "are we going to be okay?" I smiled, kissing her forehead. "Yeah, sweetheart. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be great." And as I turned out the light, I knew it was true. We had weathered the storm, and now, finally, we were ready for whatever the future held. Together. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.